Okay, so this is a process for responding to a prompt that's a little bit more didactic, I suppose, a little bit more structured than simply see, think, wonder. So it gives you a bit of a way of approaching a prompt to ensure that you're actually addressing it and that you're challenging it as well. It's one way to do it, it's not the only way to do it, but if you struggle with creating a response and knowing what to talk about, then this could help you. So at any point, stop it, pause it, look at what's on screen, but listen to me chatting away and circling things as you go. Okay, so whenever you've got a prompt, there are 4 questions you ask of the prompt, and you use these 4 questions to guide you through a response. The first question you ask is, what is the central idea, argument, key argument proposed by the prompt? So what is it actually saying? The second question is, why is it true? Third, when is it untrue? So this is where you're challenging the prompt. And fourth, what conclusions can I draw? So based on what I've just discussed, or the answers to those questions, what conclusions can I draw about the prompt? So let's look at that first question, which is, what is the central argument or the key idea of the prompt? So what you need to do in this process is consider the key words and the phrases in the prompt really carefully. So essentially this is see, think, wonder. What are the key phrases? What do I think they mean? How am I going to interpret those? So do things like offering synonyms or other ways of expressing them. Put them into your own words. And once you've done that with the keywords and phrases, rewrite the prompt in your own words, making sure it reflects a central idea or argument proposed by the prompt. So in your own words, what is the prompt asking you to do? And this will do 2 things. One, it'll give you a vocabulary to talk about the prompt so that you're not simply sort of parroting the prompt back to me. And secondly, it makes sure that you understand what it is you're supposed to be writing about. So this is the framework for your whole piece. So here's an example of an answer to that first question. What is the central idea or argument in the prompt? So the prompt we've been given is here. Our appearance can be an important factor in developing a sense of our own identity. So firstly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to circle what I think are the key words or phrases. I think certainly our appearance is important. I think also the word can. So it says not all the time, but sometimes our appearance can be an important factor. This here, an important factor, so I've got to think about how significant it is. The fact that it says factor as well here suggests that it's not the only thing that helps us to develop a sense of our own identity. And lastly, this phrase here, a sense of our own identity. This seems to be focusing on our sense of who we are, not who other people think we are necessarily, but who we think we are. Okay, so what I've done, I've thought about those and I've come up with this statement here. So the central argument in my mind is that our perception of who we are can be shaped by how we look. So you can see how I've paraphrased. So our appearance, I've got how we look. I've repeated can to ensure that I'm not saying it definitely is or always is. In terms of a sense of our own identity, I've said our perception of who we are. So this is what I'm going to work with, this statement here, that our perception of who we are can be shaped by how we look. So that's what I want to focus on in my piece of writing. So now we move on to the second question. Why is it true? We're looking at our central idea or argument, and we need to explain why it is true. So consider the central argument carefully and write down why you think it is true. Read your explanation, so read what you've written for that, and then ask why and or how, depending on what the argument actually is, what the explanation actually is. So write down a new explanation for this question, and in doing this, what you're trying to do is dig deeper to get to the heart of the explanation, making sure that you've gone back to basics. So an audience who knows nothing about identity and belonging can actually understand where you're coming from. So you repeat that process again to ensure that you've got to the crux of the matter, to ensure that you've actually explained it thoroughly. And, of course, if there are multiple reasons why the central argument is true, write these down as well. So you may find that you've got 2 or 3 paragraphs or 2 or 3 dot points to explain why the central argument is true. Okay, so here's an example of that. So what I've done is I've taken my central argument or idea and I've asked the question, why is it true of it? So the question I'm really addressing is, why can our perception of who we are be shaped by how we look? And I've come up with these explanatory points after going through that questioning process of why and how. So I've said the way others respond to what they see in us necessarily affects the way we see ourselves, because our identities are, at least in part, a combination of the various reflections of ourselves we see in those around us. Knowing this instinctively, we use our appearance as a signal to others, to let them know what type of person we are, or perhaps to attempt to let them know that we don't conform to a type at all. It's a way of categorising the world into us and them. So in this first point, what I've done, you'll notice keywords like because. So this demonstrates that you're explaining why. And what I've also done at the end here is I've put it in plain language. So it gets a bit complex here. So what I've done is I've underlined it all with that statement of it's a way of categorising the world into us and them. So a combination of sophisticated language and plain language to make it clear, my point really clear. In the second paragraph, the second dot point, I've said, but the way we look is a combination of both conscious choices and uncontrollable genetic characteristics. While we may attempt to control the views others have about us, often others will judge us on aspects of our appearance we've not chosen, for better or worse. Depending on the context we find ourselves in, we may rejoice in others' acknowledgement of our ethnic heritage or familial ties, or we may chafe against them. So in this dot point, I've moved on from the first one, and I've differentiated between the ways we attempt to make people see us and the things that we can't help about the way people see us. So it's still responding to that initial question, but it follows on from my first point. Again, I've gone through that process of how and why, trying to explain, trying to get to the heart of the matter. So here what I've got are 2 paragraphs worth of points. I'm explaining my way through the question. So these will be the basis for 2 paragraphs on the prompt. So here's another example of that. So again, I've written down the question that I'm responding to. So when is our perception of who we are not shaped by our appearance? And I've come up with these points here. I've said, when those around us judge us on aspects of ourselves other than our appearance, it can reduce the importance we place on how we look. This can occur when we are surrounded by people who look similar to us, like ethnic groups or family, or when those we surround ourselves with know us well enough to be able to perceive characteristics that are more than skin deep. And again, you can see here, it's fairly complex language. Here, I've used that idiom, more than skin deep, to make it plainer to people, to make myself understood. In the second point, I've said also, so I've used that word also to show that this is another set of circumstances in which it might not hold true. Some of us are less susceptible to anxiety over how others see us. These people often have a strong sense of self that is less beholden to the views of those around them, and thus appearance may be for them a less important aspect of their identity. So these are my 2 ways of challenging the prompt. So here's an example of a conclusion based on the points I've raised in 2 and 3. So I'm drawing all of those together, and then I'm making my ultimate statement down the bottom. So I said, appearance is an inescapable aspect of identity. We judge and are judged by others in our search to find a group with whom we feel we belong. An appearance is a convenient, if sometimes inexact, way of determining commonalities and deviations. The rejection or acceptance we feel in this process has a profound impact on how we view ourselves. Often it's only when we move beyond superficial indicators of similarity or difference that we are able to judge others and be judged in turn more profoundly and accurately as individuals. Even those whose sense of self is less vulnerable to the criticisms of others define themselves through appearance by their very lack of interest in it. Ultimately, our perceptions of ourselves are inextricably tied to others' perceptions of us, and thus unavoidably to the face we present to the world. So you can see how I've moved through my answers to 2 and 3 here. Up here, we've got answers to 2, how the prompt is true, and down here I'm expressing or I'm referring to how I challenged the prompt. And here you can see my contention, and I've signalled that through the use of this word ultimately. So ultimately, when all is said and done, our perceptions of ourselves are inextricably tied to others' perceptions of us, and thus unavoidably to the face we present to the world. So this is ultimately my response to the prompt. So in terms of what your essay will look like, this is how it will be structured. Question 1 is what you'll use as the basis for selecting relevant material to use in your initial engagement paragraph. So you look at your answer to question 1 and you look through your examples and think, what have I got that fits that? What have I got that's related to that? And that's how you choose what to begin with. Questions 2 and 3 should be the topic sentences for your body paragraphs. And question 4 is what you'll use as your penultimate paragraph. This means second last paragraph, where you draw together the points of your discussion. The only paragraph you'll have after that is this one here. So you use question 4 to guide your analysis of the material you introduced in the initial engagement paragraph, which is this one here. So this is where you're bookending. You're returning to what you started with, and you're applying the conclusions that you drew in question 4 to the material you used for the engagement paragraph. So this will be used to highlight and illustrate your contention. So you're applying the theoretical to the real. So for those of you struggling with what I mean about openings and endings and what they might actually relate to, I've given you an example of an opening and an ending for this piece. So if my central idea is that how we see ourselves is based on our appearance, this is what I've chosen for the opening. I've gone to that central idea and I've thought about what examples I've got that might relate to that. And I thought that the case of Trayvon Martin would be a good one because he was judged on his appearance. So I've said for my opening, I've got a little over a year ago, and that's this one here, a little over a year ago in Sanford, Florida, African-American student Trayvon Martin walked along the street with the slouching gait so common to 17-year-olds who are not quite boys and not quite men. He had made the trip to the store to get provisions for a night in front of the TV with his girlfriend. It was to her house in the gated community that he was returning, a can of Coke held loosely in one hand and a bag of Skittles in the other. It was dark, and he shrugged his hoodie over his head to ward off the cold. So you can see how the tone there is like a narrative, it's like a story. And I'm showing, I'm not telling. So I haven't said why this is important or how it's linked to identity and belonging yet, or how it's even linked to the prompt. I leave that for the ending. So this is the hook for my audience. The ending I've chosen is me applying the conclusions I made in that second last paragraph to the material I used in the opening. So I'm looking at trying to pull out of that opening the idea that how we feel about ourselves or how we see ourselves is inextricably linked to how others view us. And so I've returned to that opening material about Trayvon Martin, and I've drawn these conclusions. So now I'm telling the audience what I want them to see in that case. So I've said, Trayvon Martin was killed that night because of his appearance, a victim of what is called racial profiling. To George Zimmerman, the neighbourhood watch coordinator who spotted him in his headlights as he patrolled the streets of his community, Martin was a black man in a hood, and therefore a threat to the safety of those within. He was one of them, not one of us. That should be one, sorry. Zimmerman's subsequent acquittal at his trial for Martin's death was a painful reminder to African-American men that no matter how they view themselves, no matter how exemplary their behaviour, they cannot control the assumptions others make about them based on the colour of their skin. And these assumptions made by others, as President Obama so poignantly pointed out, cannot fail to profoundly shape the way we see ourselves. So apart from the grammatical errors in there, you can see how I've drawn out of that the idea that I concluded with. So basically, that second last paragraph is you making the theoretical conclusions, and the ending is applying those conclusions to material from whether that be contemporary issues or something from growing up Asian in Australia or something from your own experience, whatever that might be, and it adds a nice sort of circularity to the piece. So when you get a prompt, or all you need to do is use these 4 questions as a guide, and you can be sure that you've addressed the prompt, that you've challenged the prompt, and that you've related that prompt, or you've used that prompt to shape your piece and craft your piece into a sort of cohesive essay.